The intergalactic auction hall buzzed with tension. The screens overhead flashed with images of alien species from across the galaxy, beings of all shapes, sizes, and colors. To many, they were treasures. To the right buyer, they could mean a fortune. But for the past few hours, the mood had shifted. Whispers filled the room as the next set of defective aliens were paraded before the crowd. Elizabeth stood at the back of the room, her sharp eyes scanning the display. The beings were battered, broken, and seemingly unfit for any kind of real work or interaction. Their limbs were malformed, their eyes vacant, their postures slumped in defeat. They were the last lot on the auction block for the day. Defective. Unwanted, broken, the auctioneer's voice boomed over the speakers. And now, the final batch. These specimens have all been classified as defective in one way or another. If you're looking for cheap labor or perhaps a project to take on, this is your chance. A chorus of muted laughter echoed through the hall. The other bidders eyed the aliens with disdain, some shaking their heads and others muttering to each other. No one in the room wanted them. The human market for these aliens was non-existent. And so, as expected, the bidding remained low, with only a few hands raised for the price of a few galactic credits. 200 credits. Someone called. Elizabeth could see Evan on the other side of the room, his brow furrowed in thought. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't dismissing these aliens as worthless. In fact, he was far from it. 250. He called, his voice strong and clear. The room went silent. A few murmurs rippled through the audience as they turned to stare at him. A human? Out of all the species in the galaxy, a human was bidding on these defective aliens? It was a bold move, one that caused more than a few to scoff. But Evan wasn't fazed. He stood tall, his expression unwavering, eyes locked onto the alien creatures on display. Elizabeth had known Evan long enough to understand his instincts. When everyone else saw something broken, he saw potential. She had first met him years ago when he'd bought a decrepit, dilapidated starship, one that everyone else had written off as junk. He had fixed it up, and now it was one of the most reliable ships in the galaxy. 300 credits. Another bidder shouted. And didn't flinch. 500, he replied, his voice calm, even as the others gaped at him. He was determined, and it was clear that he wasn't backing down. The auctioneer paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Going once. Going twice. 600, Elizabeth called from the back. Raising her own bid, Evan looked over at her and smiled, a slight smirk on his face. Elizabeth had been right beside him from the start. She knew better than anyone that when Evan set his mind to something, it was nearly impossible to change it. The room held its breath as the auctioneer glanced back and forth between Evan and Elizabeth. The tension was palpable, but there was something more, something that only the two humans seemed to understand. Sold! The auctioneer finally called out, his voice cutting through the silence. To the humans in the back for 600 credits. The crowd erupted into whispers, some impressed, others incredulous. They had all thought these creatures were worthless. But Evan and Elizabeth were about to prove them all wrong. After the auction concluded, Elizabeth and Evan made their way backstage, where the so-called defective aliens were held. The creatures, who had been treated like little more than cattle, stood in their cages, broken and disoriented. But Evan's eyes softened as he approached them. One alien, a frail, four-armed being with an almost translucent skin, cowered in the corner of its cage. Evan kneeled down to its level, his voice calm and reassuring. You're safe now. The creature blinked, confusion etched in its features. Elizabeth observed from a distance, impressed as always by Evan's ability to connect with the beings that others had abandoned. There was something about him that spoke to the lost and the broken, a kindness that could heal wounds far deeper than any medical treatment. Evan stood up and turned to Elizabeth, his face serious. We've got work to do. Elizabeth nodded. Always do. They began leading the aliens out of the cages, one by one. As they walked, Elizabeth noticed how each alien reacted differently. Some flinched at first, unsure of the human's intentions. Others simply stared, too weary to move. But Evan was patient, speaking to each one with kindness. offering them the comfort and care they had been denied for so long. It was clear they weren't defective at all. Each one was a masterpiece of evolution in its own right, a being with its own history, desires, and potential. Evan and Elizabeth had seen something in them that no one else had. A few months later, the auction hall buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't about buying and selling. The once defective aliens were standing tall, their broken limbs healed, their minds clearer. They were now leaders in their respective fields, doctors, engineers, warriors, and scholars. The galaxy had underestimated the humans. But Evan and Elizabeth had proven one thing: every life, no matter how flawed or imperfect, had value. And that value was worth more than any amount of galactic credits. As Elizabeth looked at the thriving group, now part of their family, she couldn't help but smile. They had bought them all, yes, but it wasn't just about ownership. It was about what they could build together. A future, free from the judgment of others and built on the strength of what others had deemed defective.